This channel does not promote or encourage any illegal activities. All contents provided by this channel is meant for educational purpose only.
Story 1. The last experience took place in a semi-rural area. Not long after that, I ended up moving to the city. I was home alone as my flatmates were gone for the next few hours. I decided to smoke some salvia as I hadn't in a while. I spent some time relaxing, spread a blanket and pillows out on the floor, and then put Funeral by the arcade fire on the record player and sat down in a half-lotus position. I packed up a glass bong with some 25x salvia and started to go to town. After I killed the bowl, I packed another half bowl and killed it. I sat for a bit looking out the window at my friend the tree. There was this big tree right outside my bedroom window, and I spent a lot of time staring at it. At this time it was winter, so the branches were bare. As I sat there looking at it, I became acutely aware of its fractal nature. Looking at the branches, they started to become flattened, so rather than appearing as a three-dimension structure of branches, they seemed to be 2D lines curling into themselves. Then I laid back and just started thinking and letting the music wash over me. I had my eyes closed and I started to see these vivid, colorful patterns. Gradually my room started to fade away, and I felt myself slowly beginning to revolve. The revolving slowly became faster, and the patterns coalesced around me, and I found myself on this strange psychedelic merry-go-round type device. It was like a merry-go-round, but without horses or anything, and it seemed to be made out of these colorful panels of gems or glass arranged in fractal patterns. At the center was something vaguely like this. The spinning became faster and faster, and I started to get dizzy, and then found myself being flung from it out into the darkness. When I awoke, I had no memory of who I was, nor did I have any awareness of any feeling of memory loss. I just was. I was sitting in the gloaming on a porch of an ancient and long deserted farmhouse. The sky was gray and overcast in the fading light, and there was a cool breeze. I was looking out at a field of long dark green and wicked-looking grass, rocking in a chair. Suddenly I was not alone, but the instant appearance of my companion did not startle me, and I felt no curiosity about who they were or where I was or anything. I just took everything for granted. My companion and I started to discuss life and had a really deep conversation about it and the meaning of it all, but I won't relate it as I doubt it would be very interesting or meaningful to others. The conversation was quite pleasant, and indeed my companion said a few things that pierced me to the quick with realizations about life and consciousness. Throughout the conversation I got the feeling of my companion and I warming up to one another, gradually moving closer in some way, although it didn't seem that we were physically getting closer. We talked for what seemed a very long time, but at this point I started to develop these nagging pricks at the back of my consciousness. I keep having these intrusive thoughts. Something is wrong here. This is not where you belong. You are in danger. The thoughts had a sense of urgency, but I did not share them. The place was so peaceful, although admittedly a bit sinister looking, but I felt no danger. A feeling of déjà vu overwhelmed me, and then I had brief flashes of the life of a young man who lived in a city, who sat listening to records late into the night, smoking his pipe and thinking about life. I began to feel curious and question the things around me. I remarked to my companion that I felt strange, and then I started to have realizations. I realized that it was strange that I didn't know who I was. I realized that it was strange that I didn't know where I was. How am I having a conversation when neither of us seems to be actually speaking? These things dawned on me, and I want to impress it because it was so strange to go from just existing and taking things for granted and being in a place of no time to realizing these things. Then I realized that I didn't even know who I was talking to. I turned to look at my companion, and it was a giant rubber duck, about the size of an elephant. It was a really bright yellow and had a big smirking grin on its face. I have to stress that in terms of appearance, it was just like any rubber duck. It was immobile, with no life in its eye, but it gave the distinct impression of being alive. Indeed, I had just been conversing with it. It was the happiest, most innocent thing I've ever seen in my life in terms of appearance, but for some reason it emitted pure evil vibes and danger to me. In a very traumatic instant, everything came back to me. My ego returned. Then I heard from somewhere something warning me, screaming, "You have to get out of here." My surroundings started to become more sinister, the sky darkened, the wind picked up and brought a cool chill with it. The duck's smirk widened and I turned away from it. I started to panic because I had no idea where I was or how to leave. Gradually I became aware of something, some sort of room, another reality overlaying the one I was in now. It started to fade in and become more real. It seemed so familiar and I knew I had to get to it somehow, but I had no idea how. I thought about turning to see what the duck was doing, but was too scared and had this idea that if I looked at it again, something terrible would happen to me. I started to concentrate, and the room started to fade in and seem more real, and the field and porch fade out. But about halfway there, I felt this sudden shock and found myself caught in this crazy iridescent membrane. I felt a brief moment of despair, and then something told me, "Remember who you are." Suddenly I found myself sitting in the room on the floor in the half lotus, but the farmhouse and field were still there. It's just now it was overlaying the room instead of vice versa, and I was still stuck in the membrane. I shot to my feet and started slowly walking backwards, and I physically felt this sensation that I don't even know how to describe. It felt like all my skin was being peeled off, like if you've ever put Elmer's glue on your skin, let it dry, and then peeled it off, but all over my body. And it hurt. I was back in my room and the pain was gone, and indeed there was no physical remainder of it, only the memory. I had one more brief intrusive thought in the back of my head. Very weak and faint. It was going to eat you. But the impression I got was not of a physical consumption, but of something else. Once again I was really freaked out and had to leave the apartment, and for the next couple days I avoided being home alone. Story 2. I broke through on Salvia for the first time in 2.5 years. I'll do my best to explain what happened, because it was earth-shattering in a good way, and I want to hear if anyone here has had similar experiences. I'm also going to break up the bodies of text a lot to make it easier to read. Anyways, I've smoked Salvia at least a dozen times but only broken through once before. That time was definitely worth it for the bucket list, but freaked me out a bit and left me with more questions about the meaning of life than before. Ever since that time, I would only take small hits for mild effects, but for the most part wouldn't touch this stuff for months on end. Recently, I've been entertaining the idea of mirrors and their place in the supernatural world due to the malevolent feeling I get when I stare at myself in it for too long, like I'm not looking at my reflection, but the reflection is looking at me. The other day, I took some salvia and stared at myself in the mirror for 30 minutes. I definitely noticed the effects of the salvia, but was aware of my surroundings the entire time. I must have been craving more on a subconscious level though, because the next night I loaded a bigger bowl. I sat down on a red leather couch in my room with the lights set to royal blue. I also set my TV to a YouTube video of trippy fractal animations so that the mild effects would be amplified. I took a decent hit of the small 60x salvia bowl I had packed and started holding the smoke in. I remember leaning down to the right. I hadn't even had time to set the bong down before things started changing. Despite being in a blue room, the colors shifted to a much more golden yellow wheat field sort of tone, but that's the easiest of changes I can describe. The next part is confusing because it happened in what I could only imagine to be a fourth-dimensional plane, but I'll describe it in an analogy. Imagine you're tie-dyeing a shirt. The first step is to pinch and twist in the middle until it is a bundle ready to dye. Now imagine that, but upscaled so that you become some unknown entity and the twisted tie-dye shirt becomes the universe as I was now experiencing it. If you've heard of a similar analogy for a wormhole with a piece of paper, this may help explain what I was experiencing. The center of this dimensional knot started off small and at my core right hip. Initially inconsequential, but once I noticed its significance, its magnitude grew. I could tell something was wrong but couldn't tell what was wrong about it. It felt as if my head was bent over and going through my thigh as if time and space had literally folded in half. By this point I had of course forgotten that I had taken salvia. I felt trapped and scared and wanted to return to normalcy. Whatever that was. Frantically looking for a solution, I realized that I could grab the center or tab for lack of better words that controlled this dimensional phenomenon. I quickly reached down towards my right hip, grabbed the tab and pulled it in a leftward motion over my shoulder. To my horror, I realized that this only made things worse by actually increasing the rate at which my universe was collapsing with me at the gravitational center. I remember some force of my own mind saying, "Isn't it funny how all of your old problems pale in comparison to being stuck in a dimensional knot?" I agreed and pondered on how insignificant all of my problems in the past had been. I couldn't even remember them now. Anytime I resisted, reality only twisted more. My actions were irreversible. I could sense that the twisting was reaching its culmination and feared what was next to come. Quick context. At this point in the trip, I was still holding the bong, and I know in retrospect that I dropped it on my duvet cover, soaking my blanket in dirty bong water. I probably saw this and thought shit to myself IRL, but this translated differently in terms of what I was perceiving. Back to the trip. As the twisting progressed, my mind began to detach from all physical things, including my body. I felt as if I were a wet towel soaked in memories, thoughts, and all of my worldly possessions being wrung out by an unstoppable force. The last physical possession I saw leave me was the bong. As I dropped it, I started hearing obscene language and slurs from a chorus of voices as if they were the final remnants of my words being squeezed out of me. The curse words continued in a shrill tone as the visuals I was experiencing increased to a level of complexity that I couldn't possibly describe to you now. With each dimensional fold, my confusion increased and I gradually moved towards the realization that I was probably dying. After all, my universe was literally collapsing. However, I also began to sense a benevolent presence that was contributing to the chorus of curses. It felt as though someone were talking to me and cradling me through the whole process, as if it were divine. It felt as if each revelation of my death was made because of the things I was being shown. I then heard my inner voice speak in unison with my higher consciousness guide. I'll try my best to paraphrase. Imagine this, but with the trippy fractal animations. Shit, fuck shit, oh shit, fucking fuck, I start calming down. Okay, am I dying? The benevolent presence affirms my suspicion. Well, I guess there's nothing I can do to stop it. At least I'll finally know what happens. This feels familiar. In a way, it feels right. Like I am recalling forgotten information about the mysteries of the universe. At this point, I gasped in revelation. Oh my God, this is how I wanted myself to find out. I chose this long ago. I started to realize that the divine presence who was guiding and comforting me this whole time was myself, but not in the traditional sense. I was far more evolved and ever powerful. More importantly, I was a loving presence that happily awaited mortal me's return from the third dimension. I then said in awe, perfectly crafted to reveal everything to me. Does this mean I'll finally find out what happens next? Oh my God, I remember. I felt overjoyed as I began to realize that I was returning home. After this revelation, the dimensional collapse progressed exponentially until I finally left this realm and returned to what I now recognize to be my true origin, the soul consciousness from which we all originate. I will try my best to describe how this origin functions as I understood it. But first, some context. 5 years ago, I asked a girl named Bella if she believed in God. She told me that she believed we all derive from the same universal being. She believed that when you die, your soul rejoins the mass to merge with everyone else's. I found it crazy at the time, but in hindsight, I realized that I saw the exact thing she described. In this new yet entirely familiar plane, I saw my entire life and identity as a raised bump inside a massive cylinder or ring with what looked like pale blue lava flowing harmoniously amongst itself. However, it was not actually lava, but the physical form of all of the energy, light, and consciousness in the universe existing as one. There are other bumps on the cylinder as well, each representing a different identity or soul currently experiencing a lifetime. Once a lifetime ends, the bump subsides and the identity rejoins the soul consciousness once more. I existed briefly as a bump on the cylinder long enough to finally understand. Then I felt a sense of euphoria rush over me as the bump lost all form and merged back into the ring, just as all bumps have been doing for infinity. I was actually happy to be dead. Being a part of and circulating with this energy and presence felt amazing and all-loving. As I thought about how human experiences are only accessible through the ring, I realized I could live a life again if I wanted, but it was all up to me. To clarify just how up to me it was, the small amount of identity that I had left could decide to disperse and fully integrate back into the ring or stay as a unit moving among other identities who chose the same path. Additionally, I could choose to go back to Earth reincarnated if I so desired to inhabit a new vessel to experience life. I could even live the exact same life all over again. This entity truly defied all laws of time and space as humans understand it. I remember feeling a strong sense of relief and even laughter when I thought about all the moments wasted worrying about my mortality when I should have known that nothing ever ceases to exist, it simply changes forms. Just as energy cannot be created or destroyed, neither can consciousness. I felt at one with the universe. I don't remember coming out of the trip too well, but I remember being back in my room and seeing the trippy fractal animations I had put on my TV beforehand. They looked way more trippy than usual, and the patterns extended past the screen. I wrote a summary of what happened on a piece of paper while still partially tripping. The handwriting was frantic, large, and messy. It read as follows: things were peeling in a dimensional way. I heard slurs culminating to my life force ending, realizing that was how I was going to tell myself. It culminated till I died. It was quite comforting. I had forgotten that I was Seely. I can't remember what I wanted. I remember when I was writing this being frustrated about that last sentence. That wasn't me explaining how I felt during the trip, but rather the frustration I felt over forgetting something crucial. My best bet is that it was some concept that actually explains the science behind everything I'm claiming. I'll always wonder though. I talked to a friend about everything this morning and he suggested that, considering I don't remember the end of my trip, my soul could have chosen to live as Seely for just a bit longer, suggesting this could have been real. I'm not saying that this is the truth behind the afterlife, but considering I was an atheist before, this certainly is a more comforting story to tell myself. Plus, unlike those who follow more established religions, I actually saw this with my own eyes, and all it took was smoking a plant produced naturally by our planet. Like and subscribe if you want to hear more trip reports like this one. Farewell.